to virtual ways of connecting as a team. So many of us working within the program are used to working in physical spaces together and being part of teams. And as we shift to many people now working from home and many team meetings, rounds, case reviews happening virtually, we're all working to adapt. And these are important implications for how we come together to support each other, which is exactly why we've invited this dynamic group today to speak a little bit to us on virtual practice teamwork. I'm going to do something a little bit different in this webinar, and that's have the group itself introduce themselves and talk a little bit about how the session is going to be facilitated. Before they do that, I'll remind everyone that this webinar is being recorded, so it does mean that what you ask or what you write in the chat comments will be part of the recorded record. I will also remind everyone that everyone is muted. So if you have reflections to add, as you'll get instructions from the team soon, those are typed into either the Q&A or the chat function. Jen's done a great job of reminding me that if you don't see that, the chat function is at the bottom of your screen. So if you navigate to the bottom of your screen, your little chat bubble will have to be blue in order for you to be able to see the chat and be able to ask questions or offer reflections. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Joe, who will introduce the group and the purpose of the presentation.
Thanks, Jill, and welcome everybody. We're excited to be here today to do Team Talks #1, Strong Virtual Teams. The sum is the whole of its parts, and I think that perhaps that'll mean a whole lot more as we start going through the presentation today. I'm excited to be a part of this presentation with Dr. Ami Kulam, who is the clinical practice lead for Halifax CMHA, Dr. Sharon Clark, who is the advanced practice lead for CAPA, Dr. Sabina Abidi, who is a psychiatrist in the Mental Health in Addictions program, and my name is Joanne Zavenhausen, and I'm the advanced practice lead for education. And we have all been working together with virtual practice over the last little while. So I think Ami is going to advance the slides. This is great. Thanks, Ami. Wow, it's probably been about a week and a half now that we gathered together with a group of individuals representing 13 teams in the Mental Health and Addictions program to start a conversation about strong virtual teams and to look at where we were as a team right now, what our hopes were for the future, and what were the strategies that we were using to go there as we went along. So we met with representatives from a variety of the teams, and we had asked them some questions in advance, and we had a conversation. And as we listened to the conversation, we started to take some of the themes that we were hearing and to group them against some of the strong teams literature. And that's what we hope to present in this webinar today. From there, we'd like to go to how do we get there? So we've looked at what some of the themes were that came up from the teams. We also are looking at what the literature is saying about what you need to be a strong team and how you go about doing it. And now we want to look at a process for navigating teams through this uncertain period and into the what's next section that we'll be talking about. We were very, very fortunate today that we also have some reps from the other MHA teams who are going to be doing some presentations and showing us in a quick and easy version of some of the challenges that they have had with their teams, ways that they have gone about to try to meet those challenges, and how they feel they are doing with them right now. So I would like to welcome some other presenters from the teams. We're going to have Dr. Lauren Rosen from Sackville Mental Health CMHA. We are going to have Jen Mosgrove from the AIS team. We are going to have Sheila Anderson and Peter Turnbull from AIS. And we would also like to welcome today Tori Kuhn and Dr. Emma McDonald from the Guerin unit. So later on in the presentation, they'll be sharing some of their work with us. As we lead on through the presentation, we'll be looking at a plan for following up and sharing our learning. And we'll end the presentation with reflections, and we would really like to hear from you. What are your thoughts as you listen to this presentation? What are you thinking as you start thinking about your teams and the teams that you're working with? And how are you feeling about things today? So those reflections we're going to ask you to present in a chat box, and I will read them out as they start to come in. This next slide depicts the big wave, and I think that we would all acknowledge that close to 2 months ago, we were hit by a great big wave. And as we maneuver our way around that wave, we're all doing it in different ways and different stages. And that's part of the conversations that we're going to have today.
Thanks, Joe. Hi, all. It's Sabina. We were wanting to go through some of the details on this slide with you today. And as a group, when the four of us got together to talk about how to plan for a presentation around teamwork, team building, and how to cope with virtual teams, we thought best, as we tend to, particularly in CMHAs, to start with the why. You know, why were we getting together? Why was this important? And I think superficially, at least, the answer rested in wanting to respond to things that we were hearing across all services in terms of concerns in regards to the health and well-being of our clinicians. I think we were hearing a lot of comments about folks struggling, feeling distant, perhaps feeling lost, and certainly from leaders hearing comments about not having some frustration about not having their finger on the pulse of what was going on in teams and among team members. And so right away, like many of us do, we went straight to it. Let's get somewhere. Where do we want to go? And you can see that on the right hand of the slide. Folks were saying, we just need to know who's struggling. We need to understand how to support them. We need things to feel like they did before. And there was certainly a sense of loss and difficulty coping with that level of uncertainty. So the four of us together, as we were discussing this and trying to figure out how to tackle this, we realized we needed to take a few steps backwards and get a better understanding of actually before where we want to go and certainly how we get there, where we actually are now. And so I thought one of the ways to sort of describe this is actually to talk a little bit about my personal experience in hopes that would be, at least some element of it would be familiar to folks, clinicians, leaders, everyone in the services. So for me, if folks know me, I'm a doer. You know, I tend to get to the how very quickly. And again, I need to take myself back and figure out where I am now in order to do that better. And I noticed within 5 days of us moving to virtual care, you know, I was working with leaders trying to figure out how do we get people out to their homes? How do we mitigate risk? How do we manage things on the inpatient unit? I started to become exhausted. Like within 5 days, I was tired. And then things happened in the community. We had a lot of, I mean, that was a life-changing event, you know, COVID itself and coping with the anxiety of that. And then the layer on top of that of traumatic events in the community, that was a hard one as well. And I was still in action mode and still wanting to do things. And then I would say, timelines are crazy, but maybe 10 days into it, I remember I started to say to people, and I said to my colleagues here, at what point do we call chicken? And I'm referring to, if folks aren't familiar, that game, which I've never played, but anyhow, where you put people on your shoulders and it's sort of that fight until somebody actually surrenders. And I started to say to folks, I'm noticing something in myself and I'm feeling like I need to surrender. And at what point do we just sort of call it, we're done, right? It's too much. And when we started to talk about this, I realized, in fact, it's probably not surrender necessarily in terms of giving up, but it was surrendering to actually an acceptance. So when you look at that middle box there, sitting in and moving through the uncertainty, I don't know that I actually allowed myself to do that until really thinking about it. I needed to actually become aware in a very mindful way, which hopefully we're all familiar with, of all of these components that were contributing to where I was in the moment. So again, you know, coming into this with my own personal issues and challenges, my anxiety around COVID and knowing I needed to see patients and how was I going to mitigate my own risk and risk for my patients, my own personal experience with the trauma that happened in the community and how I was coping with that, the feelings of loss. I wasn't able to have, you know, those curbside consult with the colleagues who I lean on and from whom I garner a sense of myself and who I am in my community, individually, in my teams, you know, in the service as a whole. So, you know, I was tired. I needed to acknowledge that awareness. So it wasn't until I was able to sort of call chicken personally, so to speak, that I was able to land in a place that helped inform how I was going to get to where I wanted to go. And I think when we had this conversation together, the four of us, and then with the extended team members, I think that was very helpful in helping me come to that place of sitting in and moving through my uncertainty and being okay with it. One of the things that really helped me, and I think hopefully all of us, is also recognizing and reminding myself that we have shared values. And I think the values of wanting to be able to provide high quality, accessible care, client-centered and clinical care is something that helps move us forward and move us through, um, and allowed us, at least me, to see the light in terms of the post-COVID hopes, as you can see there in that green box, wanting those enhanced connections, recognizing why I actually needed them, what the positives actually were that carried me forward. So coming to that awareness, I think, is really, certainly personally for me, what helps me at least engage in a conversation about how to get to where we want to go. And I think hearing from the other services, I feel like we are all going through that same process, and it's okay. And so that sort of takes us to that next slide, MA, in terms of getting to the how.
Nice, thank you, Sabina. I think Sabina just did a really, really lovely job of illustrating a lot of the hows that we saw both in our conversations with teams about how they were navigating this uncertainty, and the things that we also can see from the broader literature about how our society, how our institutions, how our businesses are thinking about how to respond to this in a really staged way. And I think one of the leading things that Sabina really drew on was when we're thinking about, like, how do we stay together, how do we deliver quality care, how do we emerge through this, maybe even better than we started. It's really centering on being mindful, kind of being in the moment and taking the time, as hard as it is, when we're in survival mode, to really sit and be with what is. And she also did such a lovely job, as really is important in our leadership generally, but is so important in these times of uncertainty, to be really transparent, and to share, and to support that connection and that humanity, I think, is one of the things that are so important. So sharing a personal experience and relating that back to the team and using that to inform what we do next is so important. And one of the themes that came up when we were talking to the teams that were already navigating this, and that we also see in the literature, other important things and tasks of the how do we get there, is really stopping to recognize challenges, being able to, especially at the early stages, being able to really think about what are all the different ways that we can foster that connection, and to be really thinking about supportive approaches at the beginning in particular, but throughout. We do really need to know, and Dr. Clark will share more about the details of this. We do really need to know that we're supported and held by those around us and our team members and our systems. Part of that also that's highlighted is acknowledging where we are, acknowledging the strengths of those around us, and valuing those things, as well as our inner resources, our resources that we can share with each other, and really valuing the time and the space to set that out and take what we need to be as reflective as Sabina was. We think also about recognizing challenges, and in those challenges, one of my favorite quotes from some of the articles that we'll share with you later is, this time in particular is a time to really trust our teams and trust our team members, and to provide control wherever possible. The antidote in large part, when there's so much uncertainty around us, is really to trust each other and trust our needs, and be able to trust the process of experimenting, and having control where possible. That also helps us to respond as quickly as possible. So related to that, again, is the idea of recognizing opportunities as they come, and our teams talked about those, and that's absolutely part of the literature, particularly now as we start to move through and potentially even grow through this time. As we start to think about what will services look like when we return back to normal, whatever that is and was, and also what do we pull forward, so recognizing some of the positives. As we listen to teams, our smaller planning group here, we started thinking and using the metaphor of recognizing that teams are made up of individuals, and we went back to that metaphor of the bucket. Right? So for each of us as individuals, how big is our bucket? Recognizing that there's multiple taps now, multiple stressors filling up that bucket, and also multiple potential valves to let some of that stuff out. So as individuals, taking the time to think about how big our buckets are at any given day, at any given moment, and then to think collectively as a team, how big is our bucket? What's contributing to that bucket? Where are the valves? How do we let some of that pressure out as well? When we look at the other slide, it can be really complicated, uncertain, and a little bit overwhelming. And so when we think about all these different things we can be doing and thinking about, one way to organize it and maybe feel a little bit more secure in it and supported is to really channel everything through that main reason we get up every day and come to work, or get up every day, roll over and turn our computer on, whatever that is. And that's really our purpose. And at the center of everything we do, helping us to keep focused on our purpose, and whether or not whatever we're thinking of implementing is moving us closer to that purpose, is a way to, again, provide some control and some way of deciding where we invest our time and our energy. So our purpose, broadly defined, and what was common across all of us who talked, was the desire to give that high quality, accessible, client-centered care delivered by strong, high-functioning teams. Sharon is really great at making everything visual for us. So remember our wave. Here are our buckets. And how do we hold that water? How do we react? How do we work together? So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Clark now for the next piece.
Thanks, MA. I was just laughing at how organized those buckets look like, and I'm imagining, in fact, the buckets probably in real time would be like tossing all about, and we're trying to catch the wave as we're going along. So it's a metaphor we can all play with for a little bit, including how much and how big our buckets are. As we started to talk about the how, we wanted to focus a little bit and share with you some of the stuff that we have been looking at related to strong team literature. And MA, are you able to advance the slide for me to the next one? So we wanted to share with you the concept of a holding environment. And really, if you go back in sort of psychological literature for a really long time, people have talked about holding environments in terms of sort of the parenting relationship with kids, and thinking about how we respond to kids when they need us, and working in an environment that kind of, when we're able to do that, helps build creativity and comfort and curiosity. It kind of helps us make sense of things that are going on. And over time helps us develop sort of a more robust sense of ourselves. And we're not distressed, we're not sheltered from distress, but we're actually able to sort of name it and find ways to move through it. So the holding environment concept kind of became a really interesting one for us to start playing around with. And I wanted to share with you a little bit about what we were understanding around that. The holding concept is really that it describes the way another person, and in the context of a team environment or in a system, then it's really around how maybe your leaders, how your other colleagues contain and interpret what's happening in times of uncertainty. And so that containment piece is really the ability to kind of pause and to soothe when we're feeling distressed, and sort of helps us to re-regulate ourselves. And then the interpretation piece that comes from a holding environment is helping others to make sense of this kind of confusing situation. And we're all in different degrees of confusion at this point in time. And so the holding piece becomes necessary and is actually really an important element, and essential for being a precondition, essentially, for us to be able to then move forward and be inspired in the work that we do. So you'll see some of the qualities that we described of the holding environment on the left side. And the idea that when the holding environment is available, it's not only essential all the time, but certainly in crisis, it becomes kind of that grounding, that foundational piece for us to sort of sit in. And when it happens, then we're able to support each other mutually. And eventually, with time, then a new vision kind of emerges, which leads us to that place of healthy growth. So there's leadership implications. It's a thing that can help develop psychological safety, which we know is essential for strong teams. And I think it helps us think about sort of the different components that make us feel like we're grounded and able to move in a healthy way forward. Can you advance? Yeah, thanks. So also the holding environment kind of tied for me back into the work that we've been doing using the Connect model. And so for teams that are already familiar with this, I kind of want to it brought up the idea of autonomy includes connection as one of the principles. So it kind of talks there about the idea of the safe haven and the secure base, and we talk often around that idea that we want connection and we also want independence. And that's in all relationships. So when you start to tie in those kind of concepts then to the team environment, it was interesting to think about how a team can be both a safe haven for us, so that opportunity to connect and seek comfort when we're feeling distress. And when then that happens, we know then we're able to venture out too, because that creates a secure base. So we're able to explore the world. If you know that the people in your home environment or your team environment kind of have your back, then you become a surfer who can surf waves with no problem at all. But even if you fall and the wave gets you, then you kind of have an opportunity to come back to that safe haven, kind of regroup, and then feel that inspiration to be able to go back and test the waves. And I feel like if you think of the metaphor of an elastic band and how it kind of stretches, and we talk about how far it can stretch, I think we also have to be mindful that the elastic band probably shifts over time depending on the context we're in. So in times of high stress, potentially the stretch part isn't as great as it might be in areas when our stress is a little bit lower, then we're able to probably go differently. So together, those two concepts of the safe haven and that secure base end up providing a really strong foundation for teams to grow and develop, just as it does for us in our relationships with all people. So if this might be a principle that could be supportive for us as we start to think through what does that strong team concept look like. And that takes me to my next slide. And May, here you're going to have to hit the arrow because it brings up different circles because I just couldn't help myself. So the first one is thinking through the why of the work that we do, as May referenced earlier. So if we ground ourselves in why essentially being the work that we do with clients and families, we then shift into the how. So those will be the next circles that are going to arrive. So then we think about the team members who are doing that work with the family and client. So this becomes the how of the work. And then the team member is grounded in the concept of team. And so there again, we become stronger in the how and the way that we're delivering that because we're focused on that. And then we layer in the system level support. And here I kind of extended the metaphor of the water to become like a life preserver. And not because we're drowning or we're feeling desperate, but in fact, when you think about the concept of a life preserver, it's that we actually know when people need what they need and kind of responding that way. And in fact, the system has a responsibility, and we as leaders and all of us collectively as team members, thinking about how we support teams so that our shared values of those whys are able to show up in the work that we do. So that could be that we provide environments for teams to kind of experiment to figure out what is it that we need in order to be strong, and responding to teams when they do the work in the best interest of clients and families in that way. So essentially the system then holds when the leaders strengthen that structure of the team function, and even thinking about teams across all our services, when we're able to witness and understand the immediate experience. So in that case, that would be that person that kind of needs the life preserver at that point, or the team does in that way, even when we're not able to resolve that. So being able to go in, notice the distress, and being able to respond becomes really important at a team level and at a system level. And then that actually lets us then eventually be able to shift into our own interpersonal level to be able to move forward and expand that holding for all. And I think that shifts me back into the transition into the proposal that we have to share with you a process to think about this at a team level.
Nice. Thank you. When I saw that life preserver, I like had the biggest grin. Like that was such a cool little way to do it. So this is something that we've been experimenting with for quite a while, and it's nice because it didn't come about as a result of COVID, but it has absolutely helped some of our teams weather some pretty tough challenges and come out the other side. Something that, and I'm so glad Jill's on the call, even though not presenting directly, because you will absolutely feel Jill all through this. And this is something we've been experimenting with in Halifax quite a bit. Something a bunch of us years and years ago, Sharon, I'm thinking to leadership group. So all the seeds have been planting for a while, which I think speaks to the importance of this structure again. So this is a process that's been successful to us, and we'd love to have you guys think about how you might try it out and adapt it and grow with it, or grow it as well, for identifying what makes your team strong. And that's kind of where we were. And then now we're thinking about given this time, how do we translate what makes your team strong into virtual practice so you can maintain that strength and do the work that we're all here to do? So we started with, again, you'll see this throughout our talk, pulling from what we already know. So using our clinical skills and clinical frameworks to understand a lot of what's going on. And then we also know our teams, right? The more we work together, the more we get to know each other, and especially when we're really keeping an eye out for that too. So use your knowledge of your team, use your formulation skills, use what you already know about people and how we work. One of the most important things for us, and you've seen it in this presentation already, is really centering yourself in that why. So starting with why, and as a team or a group, really identifying that and thinking about how do you articulate that particularly for you. And next, and very much related to that, is identifying your team's values. Should very much be connected to your why, and you'll notice that they will. And if they don't seem to line up, then that's a conversation too, and some things to be curious about. What we found really helpful is spending time with our teams to really understand our stories. So who we are, how we're seen, how we see other teams, how we see other services, how we see our clients. Thinking about those questions that we use so often in Choice to help families figure out what comes next, where we are now, how we got here, and where we want to go. When we know where we want to go, just like we've done here a little bit, then we can start to think about what's going to get us there. When we've been working with our teams and our team stories, we try to pay particular attention to stories that might highlight those values, teach us a little bit more about our team that way, would really highlight our skills, highlight our strengths, highlight challenges and roadblocks, or when we tend to get stuck. And that's probably going to be different for each team, and it's going to be different for teams at different times too. And in different contexts, like especially now. And at the same time, we know that some themes that exist are often highlighted by really challenging times. One really helpful question that we found is to ask ourselves, when we're at our best, what are the factors that support this? And when we're struggling, what are the factors that contribute to this? So again, you're probably hearing these are our clinical questions, things we'd be working with families anyway. We know how to do this. We're applying it to understanding and building a joint formulation of our team, essentially. Another really helpful thing that's really jumps out in the literature now, particularly around distributed leadership and engagement, is knowing our team members, knowing our strengths, our interests, our values, our challenges, signs of stress for each individual. It's going to look different. What fills our team members' buckets, what drains their buckets, and how current context might influence these too. Something else that we've done that's been really helpful is to redefine what leadership looks like in some ways, and really use a broad definition. And that's just people who have skills and contribute to the team, and the team wants to follow and can follow that example. So we've had people on our team in unofficial leadership positions who have been some of our strongest leaders, just by sharing their clinical skills and helping us understand our team dynamics. And so we're forever grateful for our team members for that. One of the things that we do as well in our team is we start to share each other's ways of thinking and skills, and that's another example of leadership at that smaller team everyday level. So I will often quote each other. So people might say, if Jill's not in the room, well, I'm going to challenge Jill for this. And if Isabel's not in the room, people might say, well, I've got an Isabel question. It's even better when those people are in the room and somebody still says that. And then we think about how do we, again, if we're trusting our teams, particularly at this time, and are trusting our team members, how do we reach out to those people and let them do what they do best? The next step when you're thinking about this formulation is to identify what we call the active ingredients. So just like we're thinking about active ingredients in treatments, what are the active ingredients in strong team functioning for your team? And then the last step, or I guess next phase, next step is to think about brainstorming and experimenting with all the different ways to deliver the active ingredients that help your team achieve your why. And then at the same time, brainstorm and experiment with different ways to neutralize those ingredients that get in the way of you meeting your why. So really quickly, I just want to flash an example from Halifax. I won't walk through the whole thing, but just to give you a sense of what that looks like. So for us in Halifax and delivering strong quality care, one of the things that's most important to us in that why is really being able to share the work with each other, share leadership, grow together. And that's reflected in any number of ways. So the circles are kind of those key ingredients and values for us. And then the boxes are all the kind of systems and mechanisms in place to support that were existing before. So joining each other's sessions, clinical consultations, personal connections were huge for us, probably huge for your team as well, goal-focused reviews and feedback. And so our discussions have been focused around what are the different ways and options that we have to support those active ingredients. So personal connection, for example, how do we support that in this virtual world? And we had some team members really take a lot of initiative and implement those things. So the green here are things that we're still thinking about. What do we need to do? So this as a team allows us to revisit what's working, what we're implementing and trying, and then what we want to keep and what we want to change. So the next thing that we had is a smaller scale because that process is kind of big and can take a little time. What we wanted to do is ask the teams that we met with in a meeting before this one to start thinking about some of these things at a kind of smaller level. And so this is an example. We'll shift in, and I think Joanne or Joe will probably moderate this next part, I think, around engaging with the team members who are already there to provide some examples of how they were already problem solving. And I just wanted to let you guys know we've got this as a template at the end of our resource section. If you want to experiment with this at a simpler version, we're thinking about what's a problem you want to solve as a team. So a need or a thing that's important to your team functioning, what a proposed solution is. So what's something that would meet that need? What would you hope to result from that? So if this is really your desired outcome, you're thinking, how do you get there? If the problem was solved, what would look like? And then there's a little reflective piece. So how's it going so far? So I'm just going to advance the slide and let Joe kind of introduce our speakers, if that's okay, Joe. I hope it is.
Sounds great. Thanks, Ame.
Right.
I believe that Lauren Rosen is going to present this next one. Lauren, are you on?
I am. Can you hear me?
We can certainly hear you. So these next examples are examples that I mentioned earlier, and they're examples from the various teams, and CMHA is going to be the first one to lead us through some of their thoughts.
All right, so this is Lauren here. So I'm the clinical practice leader for Sackville. So the example that I'm going to talk about in the next couple minutes is really specific to my team. And so this is just kind of the first thing that I thought about when I was sent this slide and asked to complete it, is that one of the main things that I've been dealing with as practice lead since starting to work from home is that many clinicians are really feeling quite overwhelmed and burnt out with the workload demands, because a lot of them haven't changed from when we were working in the offices. Plus, to add to that, there's demands outside of work with many, if not all team members, different demands that are also impacting their ability to do the work. There was a lot of learning to be done in doing the work from a virtual platform. And so all of those things coming together and leading to a lot of people feeling quite overwhelmed and burnt out. So figuring out how to kind of deal with that and keep what I think is our strong team as strong as it is, and building that up even further. Ideally, what we'd like to have happen is for clinicians to have job plans that are reflective of their current capacity. And I'm thinking both capacity kind of mentally, physically, and emotionally. So thinking about what they can do within the work day, but also taking into consideration some of the factors that are outside of work that are going to impact how they're able to do their jobs on a day-to-day basis. So if the problem was solved, what would it look like? So ideally, clinicians would feel that their workload is manageable and they're being appropriately supported by both colleagues and leadership. So that would be, what we'd want to see happen. And then how I've been working on this so far as clinical practice leader, I've been meeting individually with clinicians repeatedly on the team to better understand what their unique factors are that are contributing to their current capacity and their ability to actualize their job plan. So I've been meeting with clinicians quite regularly to understand some of those factors. And then also added to this, we meet kind of at a leadership level to understand sort of how we can factor all these things in when we're making decisions about when we're going to be job planning for the next quarter, even thinking of going sort of on a month-to-month basis and taking into consideration everything that we're learning as we go, as we move forward and do this work, and figuring out what those impacts are as we go along. So it's definitely still a work in progress, but something that I continue to have these conversations with all of my colleagues and at the leadership level continually to figure out how we can best get to that desired outcome.
Thanks so much for sharing, Lauren, and you bring up so many important points there, especially thinking about current capacity from a mental, emotional, and physical perspective. So there's lots of other perspectives to be looking at, and the importance of reaching out to team members as individuals as well as collectively as a team. So thank you so much for sharing that with us. Our next group that's going to be presenting is a group from AIS, and I believe it's Sheila Anderson and Peter Turnbull. Is that correct? Peter, are you on?
Can you hear me now?
Now I can hear you. Is Sheila with you too, or are you presenting alone?
It'll just be me, I believe.
Okay, so welcome, Peter, and thanks for coming and sharing with us.
Sure. Hey, everybody. Yeah, so one way we're kind of getting there is to what was coming up over and over again was this kind of stated general feeling of being disconnected from our teams and from our secure bases, at least in a proximity sense. So what we did was one of the practices that was already in place was a weekly meeting for the 3 different streams at AIS. The yellow, the blue, and the concurrent stream met weekly and had a conversation around within the Connect principles about how we're doing, what's going on at work. So there was an ask to continue those via Zoom to kind of, what we're noticing in ourselves, what's kind of the need behind it, how it's showing up, and then a plan to kind of do our own work in moving forward. So there was an ask to continue those via Zoom, so we've been doing that. And then also to include the 24/5 and 24/7 staff populations who are not only experiencing what we're all experiencing in this time of uncertainty, they're also experiencing a lot of job uncertainty and kind of how that looks. So we provided a forum for 24/5 and 24/7, initially through phone, but now we're kind of moving towards Zoom as well, where it's a space for them to kind of come together, access their secure bases, address those needs to connect, to be validated and soothed, and to kind of access that feeling of safety within their respective teams. So we've been essentially kind of tapping into those already existing relationships and just creating spaces and forums with some objective facilitators that aren't part of the team to kind of guide the discussion. So we've been doing that for the last few weeks, and the meetings have gone well. They've been well attended, and the conversations have been constructive. They can, we talk about kind of how we're doing it, but it's not detail oriented. We'll guide behind it, you noticing in yourself, and what's your kind of work on how to continue doing that. You referenced the buckets earlier. We refer to them as the kind of the tanks. That's the question that's come up a few times. How's everybody's tanks doing? Are they empty? Are they half full? And what's your plan to kind of address that? So that's one way we're kind of looking at it.
Thank you very much, Peter. That's absolutely great. And it's also a really good example of how you can take an existing framework and expand it to meet a whole variety of different needs. So thank you very much for sharing it with us.
Yeah, thank you.
Next, we have another group from AIS, and this is Jennifer Mosgrove, who is going to be presenting some of their problem solving.
Hi, everyone. Is everyone able to hear me? Great. So one of the Connect principles that often really resonates with the team I'm with is that notion of balance, balancing our own needs with the needs of others, and also that sense of internal balance. And the way we balance ourselves typically is we have the philosophy kind of a work hard, play hard. We will share that with the teams, that's kind of how we are within our care area at AIS. We're going to have them work hard, and we're also going to find some ways to have some fun and play hard as well. Lunchtime's often spent playing games together and just getting to know each other that way. And what we found when we moved to our virtual offices at home is that balance was shifting a little. We were heavy on the work. Feeling overloaded, feeling like Zoom fatigue is real, and noticing that we were far too sedentary. For many of you have probably had a chance to visit AIS. If you haven't, it's a 3-story building. So, and there's care and things happening on all the levels all day. So those of us who have Fitbits, we're all of a sudden going like, wow, I used to get like an average of 4,000 to 6,000 steps a day just by virtue of the fact I showed up to work, because I'd be up to the classroom, I'd be over to the group room, I'd be down to the residence, and our Fitbit steps were not moving. We realized we were like just at our computers all day, and it wasn't, people were then saying, not only am I exhausted, but I'm sore, I'm achy, I hurt. So that physical depletion as well as the emotional level. So we made a collective agreement to kind of stop our meetings a little bit early, aim to have our meetings be 45 to 50 minutes instead of an hour. So we were building more breaks in. And then also some ways to kind of get ourselves moving during the day. So my husband, he works in engineering and he's a spreadsheet kind of guy. And a few years ago, he had made up this spreadsheet called Fitness Tag. So he had reinvented or re-evoked that with his team, and I asked him if he would let me share it with my team as well. So it is just simply a spreadsheet where everybody has a tab, but on that tab, you get to kind of log your movement or your fitness that you're doing throughout the day. Just a simple tracking for yourself. Anything from 5 minutes of stretching when you took a break to step away from your computer to I went and played with the kids for 10 minutes and I moved that way. I think he's got 500 activities on that list. You could probably document if you were herding cattle for an hour. I'm sure it's there. But as you track it, you kind of get a sense of what your own daily average is. And you can use that as just an awareness piece, or also the opportunity to set some intention around, you know what, I'm going to kind of keep moving that much, or I want to move more than that, or maybe I'm overdoing things and I need to kind of ease off. Alongside that is an element where there's always a few people who within the team who are it. So it's kind of like, we call it fitness tag. And if you happen to get tagged it, then to get un-it, you have to go out and do more than your daily average. Again, it's not competitive. It's just a super playful little gentle nudge of, hey, Joe, have you been to yoga lately? And if Joe's it, he may need to find some time to fit in a yoga class or a YouTube yoga video to get himself un-it, and then he tags someone else. So that will hopefully kind of keep us a little more balanced because we'll be moving and feel better. Humor, we also have woven throughout a lot of our work together. And so one of my colleagues very early on in this process of being home together or home individually started sending out some gentle, funny memes that we would find each morning. So there's an example of one inserted into this slide. And that just also becomes a way for us to kind of connect during the day. There might be some videos back like, ha, 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 or, oh, that is so me, or, oh, I wish I could hang on today. But just it's a conversation starter, and it also keeps our connection. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of where we're at with things. The tag is really new. We just started it this week, so I can't field a lot of questions on it yet, but we're hoping it helps us find our balance again.
Thank you very much, Jen. My question was, when you are it, are you doing the tightrope? You said you had to find a unique way to get out of being it, and you had to have some kind of physical movement. So
Yeah.
I was wondering there. And thanks for bringing up Zoom fatigue. We certainly hear that from a lot of individuals, a lot of teams. Needing those transition periods are so important, and looking at different ways to build them into the work that we are doing every day. So thanks for some great suggestions there too, because part of what we're doing here today is learning and sharing from each other. So thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we have Tori Kuhn and Dr. Emma McDonald from the Garin unit, and their virtual teams are working in a little bit different way. So we're really happy that they're able to share with us today. Are you on there, Tori? Tori?
Can you hear me?
I can hear you now.
Okay,
Are you on
perfect.
by yourself or are you on with Dr. Emma McDonald?
Emma's here with me as well.
Wonderful. So welcome to the two of you.
Thank you. So yeah, so I'm Tori Kuhn. I'm the clinical leader operations, and Emma's one of the psychologists on Garin here. So I think we just wanted to start by acknowledging that although we've had to make some significant changes in our workflow and care delivery, our team is able to work from the health center. So in some ways, we still have that sort of normal environment. So we do feel very fortunate about that compared to some of the other changes that the other teams are experiencing. So we just wanted to sort of start with that we are, sort of in a normal-ish environment. But so our team is it's quite large, and we're used to working quite closely together. So we're used to sort of following each other around throughout the day, and we kind of work as one unit. And so we are like a big family, and we definitely have our fair share of challenges. But two things that we think we do really well that have helped us in this new climate, are one, our ability to adapt and adjust in a really fast-paced environment. And two, just being flexible and really creative in how we deliver care. So we're used to kind of learning as we go. The patient needs and families, or the needs of the patients and families change fairly often. And so being able to think outside the box and really, do things differently is something that we're used to. But now we're sort of stepping it up a notch because how we want to, normally do things is significantly different. So one thing we continue to do is just remind ourselves of our limits right now, and just being kind to ourselves and acknowledging that just, things have to look differently. And so just, trying to really focus on what we can do and what we do well.
And so although we're obviously in the same physical space currently, there's a lot of differences about our physical space and the way that we do our jobs that have impacted our team cohesion and our connection with each other. So our goal is to create a way, to create a sense of normalcy for us so that we do feel that same connection, because that's such an important part of the work that we do. So some of the things that we've done are like pandemic safe food sharing, making sure that we always protect our lunchtime. We have our quote unquote lunch club. We've been celebrating some milestones, some really important milestones for our patients, including birthdays and graduations, and the whole staff has been involved in that. And so that's been a really important thing for us. We also are having a staff baby photo contest right now. So we're working on guessing who each other is, and it's more challenging than we thought it would be. And so because of all of these things, we've been able to maintain our connection, and we still feel the cohesiveness of our team, even though, we're definitely more spread out in the health center right now than we typically are. And so we just have to be more mindful of it. And it's been working for us. And so we've been happy that we've been able to preserve this.
Thank you. Thank you very much from Garin.
Thanks.
Hi. So really exciting, I think. And one of the most exciting things was to be able to start these conversations, and that was our hope for today. to hear about how different teams are making this work. So we just have a couple of ideas for follow-up and sharing our learning. So different ways you can start. And there's a ton of resources at the end of this, this presentation on the PowerPoint. So ways to start building a formulation with your team, highlighting those active ingredients, identifying just one problem to solve with your team, identifying something helpful today, or something that came to mind that might help, and we're hoping to have a little bit of time for reflection. Reflecting them together on the idea of holding environments. Are we holding where we can? Are there places we need to be helped? And in our reflections or follow-up after, we're really interested in other ways that people might be starting to do these things, or really, just like we tell our families, continuing to do some of these things too. We're kind of joining the bus with everyone. In terms of follow-up, again, please feel free to connect with any of the presenters and with each other, questions, reflections, learnings as they come up. We're hoping for some time for reflections just as soon as I'm done this little piece. We're also planning to review together using follow-up meetings. We're hoping to be able to organize a follow-up webinar in about 4 weeks' time. And again, other ideas for review, always open, and sometimes the best ideas just come ground up. So really interested in really continuing this and seeing this as a conversation that we built together. Turning it over to Joe to facilitate some reflections. And Joe, I can't hear you, so yes, thank you.
Thanks so much, MA. Yes, I would love to hear from people. We would like to know what your thoughts are from the webinar today. Perhaps anything that you've been thinking as we've had these conversations. We've certainly heard a lot about, I guess I'm sort of hearing 4 C's kind of coming out loud and clear, looking at connection, creativity, the mounds and mounds of creativity that we have in our program, looking at the importance of communication, the need for cohesiveness. So we would really like to hear from people and to hear if you have any thoughts after listening today. I do have one person that sent me a reflection that I would like to read off to people, and it really shows how some of the unpredictability has actually led to efficiencies in teams and ones that perhaps surprise the individual themselves as well as those around them. And this came from an individual, and she gave me permission to read this reflection. She says, I'm working from home now. Initially, I couldn't wrap my head around my team would actually provide virtual care, but I have to admit it's going quite well. The teens I am connecting to, or most of them anyways, are reporting that they appreciate having regular Zoom sessions, and we are hoping to start groups next week. At this point in my career, I usually say it's hard to teach an old dog new tricks, but currently I am sitting, shaking hands, rolling over, and juggling. If you had told me 2 months ago that I would be working virtually with my limited computer skills, I would not have believed you. So I would like to thank that person for submitting that reflection.
We're also moving a few quotes to maybe prompt further reflection as well, Jeff.
Sounds good.
I'll remind everyone, so we do have about 4 minutes or so. If anyone has reflections that they'd like to share, you can type them into the chat box or the questions box. We'll see either one, and I can cue Joe to those.
Thank you.
My guess is that people are furiously typing right now, and their fingers are flying. I want to share, just having an opportunity to sit back and listen to all of you. I think it was such a beautiful example of, we're talking about how virtual practice is something that we're all learning together as a program right now. And I think it's another clear opportunity that team is something that cuts across the program. And I think it was so beautiful to see how areas are using their own creativity and building on their own strengths to figure out what works for their teams. And particularly being able to hear from others and share it. I think one of the things that got me so excited about this is hearing what's happening in different areas. And I think there's really cool opportunities to learn from each other there, which I really, really appreciate. Absolutely.
Definitely.
Yeah. Thanks, Joe.
So I don't see any other reflections coming in at this point. So maybe what I'll do is remind everyone that they're welcome to continue to reflect on this, as Joe said, to follow up with the speakers and anyone on this. This is the beginning of a conversation, and we'll be looking at how we go forward from there. It looks like there's some resources slides. Joe, I'll turn it back over to you, and then I'll just wrap up.
Sorry, Kirsty and Isabel both had a reflection, and Marcy Balch, it's coming in the, let me know if you can't hear them.
Oh, perfect.
Or see them, sorry.
Thank you so much. I'm just seeing them come up now. Just a second. Okay, I see Marcy. This has been an example of excellence of balance and change. Thank you for Marcy. There was certainly a lot of participation program-wide in this and some wonderful examples that were shared. And I have a message from Tori. All participants, thanks so much for supporting this conversation and allowing us to share. Unfortunately, Emma and I need to run to another meeting. We look forward to future discussions.
I'll read another one, Joe, that came in off the side that I think might not be up for you right now.
Okay.
From Kirsty that says, feeling like there's a hole in my bucket due to my typical protective factors not being available to me right now. Things like the gym, seeing family, having get-togethers with friends. So I think it's important to acknowledge that it's okay that our buckets do have holes sometimes.
So true. Yes.
Last slide that's up is just resources included with this slide pack. So you've got slides describing the process for identifying what makes your team strong, translating that to virtual practice, a problem to solve template, if you want to be like our presenters and use that. And then there's a list of helpful, free, easy to read articles. So Harvard Business Review is the most of that, but tons of slides about leadership during this time, leading in uncertainty, and then things like Zoom fatigue, some of the other things we've addressed to you, and exactly what was mentioned around how do we kind of care for ourselves in this and treat ourselves kindly through this as well.
And I think I'd like to share with the group and say thank you so much to our speakers. I want to share a beautiful comment, I think, from Isabel, if it's okay, which is so grateful to see the time and energy and thought that is going into supporting our teams through this process. And I think you all are really great examples of the fact that we're thinking about all of these things. And I think it's really important. So I want to thank our speakers. I want to thank you for all of the work that you put into this and all of the leadership that you're giving and supporting teams as we go forward, and acknowledge all of the leadership that's happening across the program. I want to remind everyone, I also want to give a big shout out as usual to Jen Jeffrey, who does an amazing job in pulling all of this together and coordinating everything. So Jen, thank you so much for that. I want to remind everyone that we have another webinar coming up in 2 weeks. It should be in your calendars now. It's on virtual groups and will be facilitated by the virtual groups group. And they'll be sharing a little bit about virtual group practice, as well as some tips and some strategies for engaging youth in group. And I want to remind everyone that the recording of this webinar will be available on Pulse. We've been doing pretty well actually to get it up within a few days. So it'll be available in that center soon. And in the meantime, we'll continue this conversation, and I'm sure we'll see this wonderful group of people back very soon.
Thank you, Jill.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for joining.
Thank you.
Thanks all.